I think most of us whose lives exploded and our relationships exploded because of our acting out very much wish that we had addressed it prior to getting married. And we often talk about there's this unconscious and sometimes conscious belief that if I'm single and I get married, then that's going to resolve the sexual addiction, that suddenly it won't be an issue anymore if sexuality is available to me on a regular basis. And what we know and what everyone has said is that doesn't resolve it. But for the single guy, they can easily believe that maybe I'll be the exception or maybe I'll be different and it will resolve it for me. So the first thing that I just want to say is for the single men who are listening who believe that they're just waiting to get married and then they can work recovery or getting married will resolve it, that's not the way it's going to happen.
Co-host, and we are here today with Greg Miller as usual. Greg, good to see you.
It's good to be here.
All right. And our special guest today is the clinical director of Faithful and True, Jim Farm.
It's good to be back, you guys.
Jim, it's great to have you back. We are here today to talk about a couple of really interesting topics. And tell us about the first one we're going to do today.
Yeah, I got a question from one of the guys in one of my small groups that he would really like us to talk about at some point. What does recovery look like if you're a single person?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what's true is a lot of the men who come through Faithful and True, they may be single because they've never been married up to this point. Or for some of the men, because of their acting out, they're now divorced and now they are single. And so it doesn't necessarily look different, but I do think what's true is the motivation may be different. Mm-hmm. When someone comes to Faithful and True and they are married, a lot of times their motivation is to save their marriage. And they want to save the coupleship. And they also are kind of motivated towards sobriety because they don't want to have to tell their spouse that they lost their sobriety and all of the pain that can create. And so for the single guy, they don't have that same level of motivation. It's almost more of kind of looking towards the future. And in a future relationship, I don't want to bring this into the relationship, but how do I stay motivated now?
That's right. And it's very interesting because the married guys, when they're in group with the single guys, they're like, man, I wish I would have had that awareness before I got married to work on this.
I think most of us whose lives exploded and our relationships exploded because of our acting out very much wish that we had addressed it prior to getting married. And we often talk about there's this unconscious and sometimes conscious belief that if I'm single and I get married, then that's going to resolve the sexual addiction, that suddenly it won't be an issue anymore if sexuality is available to me on a regular basis. And what we know and what everyone has said is that doesn't resolve it. But for the single guy, they can easily believe that maybe I'll be the exception or maybe I'll be different and it will resolve it for me. So the first thing that I just want to say is for the single men who are listening who believe that they're just waiting to get married and then they can work recovery or getting married will resolve it, that's not the way it's going to happen.
Yeah. And I think that's especially relevant for guys that have maybe a strong faith background. It's almost like I got that stamp of approval from a Christian perspective. Now I'm married, now I can have sex.
Right. And everything will be okay. But again, what we talk about at the workshop is that sex addiction is not about sex. It's about how I use sex. And part of the challenge is if I'm unhealthy in my sexuality prior to getting married, then I will bring that unhealth into my marriage. If I've found sexual health as a single person, then I will bring that sexual health into my marriage. And so really it's this idea of being committed, even as a single person, to being a healthy sexual person with, if it's what someone desires, with the hope of one day being in a healthy functioning relationship.
Yeah, I think some of the things that may contribute to that is oftentimes if they haven't really experienced a healthy relationship, maybe in their family of origin, and then experience the intensity of a sexual experience, now their definition of intimacy is the intensity of a sexual experience.
Right. Yes.
Right. And so then they get into a marriage. Now it can have the intensity of sex, but there might not necessarily be intimacy or a intimate relationship.
Right. Well, and even the nature of sexuality is it does create this sense of connection. And if all I have is sex, then when the sexual experience is over, then the connection ends. And so for men who have a series of relationships, maybe they've never been married, or maybe they would never even say they've been in a long-term committed relationship, but they've had a lot of sexual experiences, they may believe that being sexual is the only way to create connection or the best way to create intimacy. And so they struggle even knowing how to have a relationship without there being a sexual component to it. And so part of it is, again, understanding for those men who are single but have had a history of sexual experiences, part of the work of recovery is not just giving up unhealthy sexuality, it's developing a healthy understanding of sexuality.
Yeah. One of the things, I've heard you talk about at the workshop quite a bit, because I want to come back to that question or that issue that I think a lot of single guys have is, well, this will be solved when I'm married.
Mm-hmm.
And I know at the workshop, one of the things you do talk about is this concept of addicted sex and marriage,
Mm-hmm.
which I think usually plays right into that belief that, this will be solved when I'm married.
Right. Yeah. The idea of addicted sex and marriage is the way that God created sexuality. It's for the purpose of intimacy and connection. So kind of the framework is I'm present with myself, my partner is present with herself, we're present with each other, and in that sacred space, we're present with God, and then we move towards each other sexually. So it begins with my ability to be with myself and to be with my partner. And so it's about intimacy, it's about connection. Well, sexual addiction or acting out in my marriage or addicted sex in marriage, that's when I'm using my sexual experience in marriage to get a hit of my drug. So it's not about connection. It's not about being with my spouse. It's about some sort of relief. It's the same principle of the addiction. I'm wanting to be rescued from something. I'm wanting to be rescued to something. And one of the ways I can know it's addicted sex and marriage is if I'm not really present with myself, present in the experience, present with my partner, then it really is more of this addiction energy of wanting to pickpocket something from the experience.
Yeah. Which then kind of brings us back to the question, well, what do you do if you're single, with this sexual energy, or where is this sexual energy coming from? And I think that's where we can kind of talk about sometimes that, is it really sexual energy, or am I trying to get some of these deeper legitimate needs? Like you say in the workshop, am I getting these legitimate needs met in a legitimate way?
Right. Well, when I talk about sexual energy, I think there are 4 things that really contribute to that. One of them is just biology. God created us to be sexual people. We have the neurochemistry, we have the hormones, we have the biomechanics of sexuality. And the reality is, to be fully who God created me to be, it is about engaging who I am as a sexual person. The second thing I think that contributes to sexual energy or sexual drive is just curiosity. Kind of the question of, I wonder what it would be like to. And curiosity is a good thing. It's part of who God created us to be. In fact, I often say that curiosity is the beginning of faith. Curiosity is what moves me towards that which I do not understand, and that is the entry point into faith. So it's not about doing away with curiosity. It's about being a good steward of that curiosity. The third thing is what you just talked about, and that's the addicted sex and marriage, or the addiction energy, and that is trying to meet a legitimate need in an illegitimate way so that sexuality now has an agenda beyond just being connected or being intimate with my spouse or partner. And then the final thing is what God had created was connection to someone else. That the fourth thing that really drives our sexuality is to share it or to experience it with somebody else. And so one of the things that we see is for men who struggle with sexual addiction, it's that third type of energy, that trying to meet a legitimate need in an illegitimate way, that is the strongest. And so for the single guy, what he's working on is accepting the fact that God created him to be a sexual man. It's a good part of who he is. And for a lot of men, because of the messages they've been given, there's so much shame about even having a sexual desire. that it's hard for them to recognize, no, this is part of God's creation. It's also acknowledging the curiosity. I do wonder what it would be like to have a wife, to have an ongoing sexual experience with a partner, and then also that drive of being with someone in an intimate way. The thing that the single guy can work on is getting rid of and significantly reducing that addiction energy and not using sex as a means to an end.
Mm-hmm. So a big part of singleness then is really beginning to, learn those relationship skills, learn how to deal with his emotions and his emotional needs in a healthy way and in the context of a relationship.
Right. Well, if healthy sexuality begins with me being present with myself, then that's one of the things I have to learn how to do. The nature of addiction is it distracts me from myself. It is a intentional attempt to exit who I am and what I'm experiencing. And so it does take skill, it does take intentionality to learn how to be present with myself, because for a lot of us, when we begin to get present with ourselves, what we begin to discover, what we begin to experience is some old pain and grief and sadness and hurt that we've been wanting to medicate and avoid. And so for the single guy, I work on that capacity to be with myself and then find healthy ways to be with other people. And that's where group comes in so handy, is that if I'm a single guy in a group with married men, then I can practice being known, being safe, being connected to those men. And it's a skill that I can learn that I can then transfer to my dating relationships.
Mm-hmm. And that involves communicating feelings, needs, but also being empathetic and attentive to others' feelings and needs, which I think is really important when you're single and, maybe beginning to want to date and things like that.
Yeah.
I remember when my boys were, in high school and they began dating, one of the things I shared with them is if you can't talk to your date about it, you probably shouldn't be doing it.
Right.
And so I think it just, having those relationship skills, I think that's a big part of the, being single is learning those things, or, even if you've already been married, but you haven't developed those skills.
Right. And part of the dynamic of sexuality, it is such a powerful part of us that when it is introduced into a relationship, it can consume the relationship and become the primary thing that defines the connection. And that's why it's about stewarding sexuality, not engaging it early in the relationship so that it consumes it, and that's what the relationship becomes about. What's also true is for a lot of men who maybe are young, who don't have a lot of experience dating, that this is a pretty intimidating thing. Part of the nature of pornography is it pulls us out of reality. It pulls us out of relationship. So it's fairly common for some of the men who come through Faithful and True to have very little dating experience, and that the dating experience that they've had may have really been difficult or painful. And so it really is about learning this even skill of how to date, how to be connected to someone, how to show up in a safe way for someone, and very much kind of that communication piece. Do I know just how to have a conversation with someone about their interest, about my interest, and it be a way to connect without there having to be this physical or sexual component?
Yeah, there's a lot of risk with that, in the sense of if I've already struggled in this area, I know I've heard you say before, it's almost like someone can see right through you. Mm-hmm. And so the willingness to risk, your needs or feelings in a dating relationship, if you're already feeling a lot of shame because of your acting out, so it is really important to start to deal with the shame of that before you start, in a group type setting, which kind of helps with some of the courage and confidence to be able to risk those things.
What's also true is there's another category of men who are single, and yet they have a great deal of dating experience and they have a lot of sexual experience. And in fact, they have difficulty imagining a dating relationship where there's not going to be sexual interaction. And so it's kind of been their go-to. It's their thing that they use to connect. It's their thing that they use to relieve their tension, their chaos, and so for them, it really is a new skill to be in a dating relationship without there being primarily a sexual component. And so learning boundaries, honoring somebody else's boundary. And, one of the things I often say about a healthy relationship is if it's going to be healthy, everybody gets a yes, everybody gets a no. And one of the best things that we do is to learn to honor somebody else's no. But for the guy who has a history of acting out sexually in dating relationships, that's one of the things that they're wanting to do because that's how they create connection. So for them, it's also learning how to date without there having to be sex as the only way to connect.
Yeah, and that might be the question mark. How do you connect without the sexuality? But I think at the same time, having those preset boundaries for themselves is one of the things they need to work on. Otherwise, whoever they try to, begin a dating relationship with will not feel safe because she'll recognize pretty quickly that he doesn't have any boundaries.
Right, yeah.
I
think another thing that can be true about the chaos and the dangers of pornography is it gives us a distorted view of relationships and also a distorted view of sexuality and maybe beauty. And so for the guy who's been significantly exposed to pornography, they carry a distorted lens into the dating world. And so they have unrealistic expectations for people physically. They have unrealistic expectations for people sexually, unrealistic expectations for people relationally. And so some of the greatest danger of pornography is it teaches us things that are destructive, and I have to be willing to unlearn those. And if I can unlearn them, then maybe I can learn some of the more redemptive principles that make it possible for me to be in a healthy dating relationship.
Yeah. I know in your own research, you've discovered some things about that early exposure just really creates a lot of body shame for a guy that can set him up for already kind of putting himself in a pretty, lower position and beginning in a dating relationship.
It almost seems like our overexposure to social media, and for the men that we work with, an overexposure to pornography, it's creating more chaos in their day-to-day relationships. And it may be very obvious and direct, it may be very subtle, but even if it's changing my expectations of what a dating relationship is going to be, and those expectations are unrealistic, I'm never going to be in a satisfying relationship. And so I would say for the guys who are single, part of the challenge is not looking towards this future relationship to save me, not believing that some sort of ongoing sexual experience is going to rescue me or heal me from the addiction, and needing to find other ways to be motivated other than being married and having a partner or a wife that would be disappointed in me. It really is this idea that because of the person I want to be, the man I want to be in relationship, I'm willing to do this work, even if there's nobody else, if there's not another relationship that is holding me accountable, I want to do it for myself.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful spot because that's what we want guys who are even married that come to our centers. That's where we want them to start. Yeah. And so the single person has an advantage there. He's just already starting at that spot.
And I would say, there's a challenge to being a married person in recovery. There's a challenge to being a single person in recovery. But there's also the gift of singleness, this idea that it's what the married men have said, man, I wish that I had dealt with this before I got married, because now they're seeing the chaos and the destruction that bringing this into the relationship has created. And so for the guys who are single that are listening to us, what I would say is steward this opportunity, go after it, believing that if I do my work now, if I figure out how to get free as a single man, I won't bring this chaos into the relationship, which means we're setting the relationship up to really be what it is that God intended for the relationship to be.
Yeah. And I've always kind of said some of the healthiest guys have been through a recovery process. They've developed awareness that they need recovery.
Absolutely.
Which creates a lot of trust.
And instead of being ashamed that I'm in recovery, it actually becomes something that I want people to know, because it is shaping and forming me to become the man that God created me to be. And so if, someone is asking you about your journey, your story, and, you're able to say, yes, I'm in this journey of recovery. I don't want to be living in bondage anymore. For many people, that will be something that is very appealing. I often say the most attractive men are those wise men who are becoming the men that God created them to be. That's what we work on if we're looking for healthy relationships.
Yeah, that's exciting. And so I think this is a great topic, because I think sometimes single guys feel like they're less than because they're not married, and they won't have this issue if they were married. And so seeing it as an opportunity to really to grow and develop in self-awareness and become a who God's called them to be, and potentially at some point a present husband at some point.
And this is such an important topic. We're going to continue it in the next podcast. And what we're going to be talking about is, what does a woman do when someone she's dating does confess that he's struggling with pornography? How do you navigate that in the dating relationship?
Yeah. And then how does he bring it up? Or how does he bring it up?
Right. How do we have that conversation?
Yeah. Sounds fun.
Stay tuned for that one.
Yeah.
So, Jim, have you got, in your men's groups, is there, what kind of percentage do you have of married versus single guys?
I'd say the majority of them are married, but I would say, it could be guys that, maybe are single and young, or they could be maybe divorced and single. So I'd probably say maybe a little bit less than a quarter of them, maybe.
Okay.
And one of the things that we do see is, for those guys that are divorced, there's a temptation to want to just set this aside and not address it because, well, my marriage didn't make it, and not really addressing the issue. But what we know is, if I don't deal with it, if I do find someone else, I will bring it into the next relationship. And we've worked with a lot of couples where this is actually their second marriage, and it was the reason that the first marriage ended, and yet they found each other and they didn't really address the issue. And so here they are all these years later in a second marriage having to deal with the very same thing. So there's a naivete of, oh, well, next time it will be different. And that's what every addict tells himself. But it's not going to be different if we don't address it and go after it and begin to change it.
Yeah, yeah. And I would suggest, because I've heard this from some guys who have gone through the divorce process, is, can I be a member of the group anymore? Because maybe they're in a group where the rest of the guys are married.
Right.
We're like, yeah, absolutely, because this is about becoming who God's called you to be, single or married.
Right. And I want to highlight, not too long ago, Deb Laaser and I did a podcast for people who are a part of the Faithful and True community and went through a divorce, to recognize that there is that group that, for a variety of different reasons that we talked about, their relationship didn't make it. And it's important for them to realize that even as this divorced person, what I decide to do impacts my future. And this is a great opportunity to go after this so that I can get free, whether I ever get married again or not.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's single, single and young, or single later in life because of the divorce. But it's recognizing I am recovering what God intended, for me sexually, and not letting go of that goal, regardless of where I'm at in terms of that singleness.
Well, I also see where, for some guys, there's this idea of I'm motivated because I'm in a relationship. The relationship ends. And finding that motivation again of, I'm doing this, not in this selfish, I'm doing this for me, but I'm doing this because I don't want to live like this anymore. I don't want the people in my life to be exposed to this anymore. For the single dad, it's, I'm doing this because I don't want my kids to be influenced by this or impacted by this. And so even though the marriage didn't make it, or as a single guy, maybe I was in a significant committed relationship. We have a lot of guys who come to the workshop who their engagements ended because they just could not get a handle on this, and it kept on coming up, and their fiance determined, I'm not going to stay with you if this doesn't get addressed. So it's that idea of, I really do want to be free for me and for the other people in my life.
Mm-hmm. I think this, one of the things with singleness too, is it provides you with, this advantage of really beginning to depend on your community. Mm-hmm. Where, some guys might struggle with, I'm going to go to my wife with this.
Right.
Which is never a good thing, especially early in recovery, because she's hurting. And we teach guys, like we talked about actually in staff meeting on Monday, where, a lot of that shedding of shame is happening in the group and not with your spouse.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and, again, relationship skills are something that I have to learn. And I can learn them in the context of a good, safe community with other men. I can learn honesty and transparency. I can learn accountability. I can learn to be committed. I can learn to follow through with, what I say, and all of those things that create chaos in a relationship that maybe did cause a relationship to end. I can actually work on those with my community of men in a safe environment. And I'm not going to do it perfectly. If I'm learning something, I'm not going to do it well every time. But the community can create a safe space that allows me to try again and again and again as I'm trying to figure out how to live differently.
Yeah. I don't know if I should throw this in here the last second, but I might, because it comes up and I'm going to see what you have to say about it. So Aaron might have to edit this out later. But if you ever, one of the things I hear from single guys, but I have this sexual need.
Mm-hmm.
It's a need. So do we believe there's a sexual need, or do you feel like it's a sexual desire?
The way I would say it is the need is for intimacy and connection. And that's one of the reasons that makes it so powerful. And then God has created us with this sexual desire. And what's true is I can't steward something that I don't own. So celibacy is not denying my sexuality. Celibacy is owning the fact that I'm a sexual person and then identifying how do I want to steward this. God did not create us in such a way that if we don't have sex, we will die, even though guys may joke about that if I don't have it, I'm going to die.
Yeah, I actually hear that quite a bit, actually.
So from a biological perspective, we know that that's not true. And I think some of that urgency, some of that that over focus on it is part of that addiction energy that we've been talking about. Mm-hmm. And so what's true is I can name that I'm a sexual person. I can even talk about my desires to one day be in a healthy, functioning sexual relationship. And I can also say, and I can wait. Mm-hmm. I can wait till I find that person. I can wait till I find the context. I can wait till I have the skills to be known so that it can be an intimate sharing experience rather than just a physical act. What's interesting about sexuality is I believe it involves every aspect of who we are. Mm-hmm. So it's about who we are spiritually, it's about who we are emotionally, it's about who we are relationally, sexually, mentally, and physically. So all parts of us are involved in it. The great irony is that when God created us, the first thing that comes online is the physical part of who we are sexually. Mm-hmm. And because of that, I think we can over-prioritize that as if it's the only thing. Well, the great irony is the first thing to come online is the physical part of who we are. The first thing to go offline is the physical part of who we are. So if the only way that we know how to be sexual is through some sort of physical experience or a particular physical experience, it's going to be a very limited sexual experience. But if I learn to bring my full self to the experience beyond just who I am physically, then I can, I think, realize what God intended all along. And so that's ultimately what we're waiting for, is this holistic experience of being fully present, being fully known, feeling safe and connected in the context of sexuality. And so as a single person, there may be things that I can work on in my sexuality that have nothing about, at this point, expressing myself physically. But when we prioritize the physical part over every other aspect of sexuality, at some point I think it creates a distorted understanding of sexuality.
Mm-hmm. So part of that singleness, because we often do get that question, well, then how do you express your sexuality when you're a single person? I think you just answered that in regards to, well, I can risk being known emotionally or spiritually or thought-wise. Mm-hmm.
And I can name my desire.
Yeah.
What's interesting is I can name my desire for sexuality and recognize that there's no one in my life that I feel committed to or engaged enough in, that we have enough of a context to really support sexuality. Because what's true is sexuality is a significant part of the relationship, and it takes a lot of relational strength to carry it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of relationships end because the people began to be sexual way before the relationship had the capacity to carry it. Mm-hmm. And so I do think that there is a way to acknowledge I am a sexual person. This is who God created me to be. And because I want it to be everything God desires, I'm willing to have boundaries. I'm willing to wait. I'm willing to put work into this so that when I'm in the right context, I can experience it the way that God desires.
Mm-hmm. That's really good, Greg.
Yeah.
I think we answered his question. Hopefully.
But it doesn't hurt to ask. Well, Jim, thank you so much for joining us today. It's always great to have you on the podcast with us. And as Greg mentioned earlier, we're going to follow up this podcast with another one. So we will wrap things up for today. We hope that this message has been impactful for you. We invite you to visit our website, faithfulandtrue.com, where you'll find many resources available to you, as well as nearly 600 podcasts similar to this one, under a wide variety of subjects that we think are going to be beneficial to you. In the meantime, we'd like to have you be aware of our Men's Journey Workshop, which we host every month here at Faithful and True. The details and schedule for that are on our website. We also have for the wives, we have the Women's Journey Workshop that we host about 3 times a year. And we've got one of those coming up in a month or 2 as well. And then we have 2 different varieties of the Couples Journey Workshop. So all that information and scheduling is on our website, faithfulandtrue.com. In the meantime, thank you for joining us today. And we hope that this coming week for you will be a week that's filled with many blessings and with great vision.